Today's book is Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young, and if you have kept up with me at all, you know that I have read another book by her, which is The Girl the Sea Gave Back, and it is actually the sequel to this novel. I was not impressed, but in doing my research, in reading other people's reviews, I read so many good things about Sky in the Deep, so I decided I'm gonna get around to it. And I finally did. I was impressed, which actually makes me that much more disappointed in The Girl the Sea Gave Back, because Sky in the Deep proves that Young knows how to write. She knows how to write characters that are engaging. She knows how to write characters that are strong. She knows how to create a world that I'm interested in. And she knows how to center a story around a plot. Those were kind of the main issues I had with The Girl the Sea Gave Back, is I didn't understand the plot. I didn't understand the motivations of the main characters. But as I said, this review is not about The Girl the Sea Gave Back. This review is about Sky in the Deep. Halvard is in this book, although he's a minor character. And on another note, I do really enjoy when authors take minor characters and give them their own stories. So if I had read this book first, I probably would have been super excited to read his book. As it turns out, I read his book first. I was not impressed, and then I read this one, and I mourned the fact that Halvard was not done justice. As for The Sky in the Deep, it is, as I said, a Viking novel, and it really centers around these two clans, the Aska and the Riki, and how they basically have this blood feud. They're just two clans with different gods and kind of different ways of living, and for some reason, they don't like each other. I listened to it on audiobook, so maybe I missed it, because I gotta say, I was not immediately drawn in, which is interesting because it starts with a battle scene, but it took me a couple chapters to really be engaged, and maybe it was in those first few chapters that Young explained why these two clans hate each other. In my research, somebody else was just talking about basically, because it's a difference of opinions. They have their different gods. They serve their gods the way that they're going to do it, and therefore they fight every year. As I was getting through the book, I understood what a fighting season is, but my brain says, or my common sense more like, is like, why would you do that? If you don't have to fight, why are you fighting? And you're basically planning to fight at a certain time every year. So their lives are about preparing for this fight. That's kind of stupid in my opinion. A lot of people are going to disagree with me. Biggest question I had throughout this book, which it may have only been a question because I missed it in the very beginning, was why are they fighting every year? I didn't understand what started the blood feud. Anyhow, the plot. The plot. It opens up with their fighting, and the main character, I can never remember her name, Elin. So she and her fighting partner Mira are fighting, and then she comes face to face with a clansman from the Riki, and they are battling, and then this other Riki shows up, and she's like, that's my brother Eerie. What we eventually learn is that she thought Eerie was dead. In like 5 years past, she and her father had assumed that he had died. This is another thing I do not understand about the fighting season. So, picture this. You wake up, you get ready, you go on the battlefield, and you fight to the death. And then it's like, I don't know, a horn blows, and everybody says, all right, we'll see you tomorrow. So this is kind of what happens. She's fighting, she sees this guy who she is convinced is her brother. The day ends, she goes home, and she's like, Mira, Dad, I saw my dead brother. And they're like, I don't think so. So she goes back out on the battlefield the next day, and she sees him again. And she's like, you know what? This time I'm not going to let him go. So she follows him. The Riki capture her, and they take her to their village, and the whole idea is, as an Asuka, she will then be sold as a slave, which is not a good thing, which I don't understand, because I just don't understand. But the idea is, if she becomes a slave, she can no longer be allowed to go to her own afterworld. Which, please explain to me why that affects your afterlife. I understand the concept of, I now have to serve someone else and potentially serve their god, but it's not by choice. So why does that affect her afterlife? I mean, for me, I'm a Christian. I die, I go to heaven because I believe in God. No matter what happens in my life, if I end up serving a family that has a completely different religion and belief system than I do, my faith is my faith, and no matter what happens to me, it does not affect where I go when I die. But it was extremely important to her that she not become a doer, and nobody back home learns that she's a doer, because if they do, then she can't go to their own afterworld, which, again, like, why does it matter if they know? Alright, I'm getting off track here. Nobody knows her relationship to Eerie. The idea is that she will be sold, and what ends up happening is that Fisk, the guy she had been fighting, who is Eerie's basically adopted brother, he comes and he buys her, and he brings her back to his home, or to his family's home, and she becomes their doer. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Blah. I guess you could call her their servant. I don't feel like she was ever truly a servant, probably because she lucked out and got a benevolent family who, yes, she did chores, but it's nothing that they wouldn't have been doing themselves. It wasn't like, hey, doer, like, you go do things while we sit and eat cake. So now she's living in a Riki home with her Asuka/Riki brother, and she has learned that 5 years ago, when she thought he had died, he ended up being saved by Fisk and Fisk's dad. Eerie had been fighting Fisk. They both fell off a cliff. They were both assumed dead. However, Fisk, because he's incredibly kind-hearted, which I really need to get into, saved Eerie's life and then convinced his father to bring Eerie back with them. So then Eerie comes back to this Riki village. They eventually accept him. Now he is, I mean, these are all spoilers, guys, like, sorry. Now he is potentially engaged to a Riki girl named Bruna, and Elin is irate. She is livid. She cannot believe her brother would turn his back on his own people, which I loved that aspect of the story. That, I thought, is what really separated it from The Girl the Sea Gave Back, because the protagonist in The Girl the Sea Gave Back had no opinions, had no drive. The story gave her a purpose, but it didn't feel like her purpose. Elin was like, I think not. And I loved the emotion that came from it. But let's keep going. She's in this impossible situation. She really wants to get home, but it's basically winter. She has no idea how to get home, and it is promised that she can return home eventually. But what happens is another warrior group, which I really wish would have been explained, and I kind of associate them with orcs. I know very little about the Lord of the Rings world. That is on my TBR. But orcs are kind of this demonic race, and that is sort of what I thought the Heria were. Sorry, like, these names I just cannot pronounce, and I can't remember them because they're so weird. Anyways, so the Heria are like the villains to everybody, whether they're Asuka or Riki. They come and they raid this Riki village that Elin is in, and she realizes that they are wearing Asuka armor, which means that they have probably raided her village. And now she's like, I gotta get home so I can see if everybody is okay. She gets home, spoiler alert, the village suffered massive losses, but her father is okay, and Mira is okay. They have relocated. So now the deal is, Riki and Asuka have to band together, but they hate each other. So how is this gonna work? The deciding factor was basically learning that Eri was alive, because her father and Mira decided to come back with them to the Riki village, but the plan that had been concocted with their chief was kill Fisk. He's a Riki, like, kill him. When the father learns that Eri is alive, and I loved this too because it goes in line with that blood feud, with that born-bred hatred of other people just because. Elin has had to overcome it. And now she's like, will my father accept it? Like, will he abide by what he has been bred to feel and think? Or will he let his love for his son take over? So I loved that juxtaposition, that tension of blood versus water. There's your ultimate spoiler. The clans do come together. They basically defeat the Heria, and then if you hadn't figured it out, Fisk and Elin fall in love, and we do come to a crossroads of what are they gonna do? Because sure, the Asuka and the Riki have banded together, but that doesn't really mean anything for the future. There is a possible hope for the future that they can resolve their issues, but in the meantime, where does this couple go? Because Eri is staying, I think he's staying in the Riki village with his fiance or whatever she ends up being at this point. Does Elin stay in the Riki village with Fisk and his people, or does she return to her people with an enemy? It was really nice, and in the end, they do go back to the Asuka, and they also bring Halvard and Inge, which is Fisk's mother, who's a healer, because the Asuka have lost their healer. And so that does explain some questions for me, because in Girl the Sea Gave Back, obviously Halvard is a main character, so you see some of these characters in that book, and you're like, how'd they get there? That's basically the story. I read someone who had been really looking forward to this book because of all the good reviews. This reviewer was just like, it was good, but it wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. She thought the plot was pretty simple. Scenes were all pretty independent of each other, and there were some that I completely agree. However, I didn't think it was that bad. It was much better than The Girl the Sea Gave Back, but that is not hard. But I enjoyed this. I did have trouble getting into it in the very beginning, but by the end, I found myself carrying my iPod around, trying to listen to the end of the story. That said, let me get into some of my issues. My biggest issue I've already touched on, and it was the reason for the fighting season. I just don't get it. Any battle, the intention is to win, right? And so, I don't know how long these two tribes have been fighting each other, but wouldn't you think that the ultimate goal is to eradicate the other? To me, it felt like they were fighting just to fight. Like, yes, we want to kill more of them, then they kill more of us. But over time, wouldn't it get tiring to know that you have not completely demolished a people group? I would be saying, what's the point? I was saying, what's the point? Especially because that's basically, they are bred to be warriors. Maybe that's the Viking way. Like, maybe Vikings fight just to fight. They don't necessarily have to get rid of the entire enemy. In my brain, I saw no point to the fighting. My second issue was Fisk and Elin's romance. What I liked about it was that it wasn't obvious. It wasn't a stereotypical, oh, love at first sight, which we know my issues with. But okay, trying to figure out where to go with this. So, let me begin again, right? Not love at first sight, but it wasn't loathe at first sight. Like, she did recognize his attractiveness. He was relatively kind to her. There were some instances where foreshadowing was involved. Like, you knew that there was going to be the romance between them, which I liked it just because that's YA, but I kind of would have liked to have seen it without the romance, because while it played well into the end, at the same time, I felt like it was a bit superfluous to the plot. It was two warring clans that have to find a way to come together. And so in that way, yes, it made sense and it was necessary because it was their bond, their growing affection for each other that made her realize that two opposing clans don't have to be opposing anymore. I didn't get a lot between them. There were not a lot of scenes to build their relationship, whether platonic or romantic. It was just assumed that because they spent time together, they were falling in love. But I felt like we went from somebody who was kind-ish to somebody who she bonded with during a moment of trouble to, oh, hey, we're in love. What? Excuse me? Like, pardonnez-moi? I missed something here. Didn't see any way really how he won her over, except that he was not a tyrant, and he did save her from a bear, which kind of sounds silly, because you're like, well, duh, there it is, that's obvious, but going back to Fisk's kindness. A reviewer said he was the most open-minded character she had ever come across. And I was like, you know what? You are so right. And that is something that had bothered me, and I couldn't quite pinpoint the problem. But it was that, obviously, Elin hates the Riki with a passion. She would set the village on fire. She would commit genocide. She hates them. And maybe it's because Fisk has spent time with Eerie, and so he has a fuller understanding of what it means for everybody to be equal. But even before that, as I said, he was the one Eerie was battling when Elin and their entire tribe thought Eerie had died. These two guys were 13 or 14 when it happened. They were old enough to take part in the fighting season, old enough to already have grudges. So how was it that Fisk had the clarity of mind and heart to be like, I'm going to keep this guy alive for days? Like, fell off a cliff of some sort, okay? Like, they could not get out. So, for days, he kept his enemy alive? And then he convinced his father to spare the guy, to bring him home, to rear him as his own? The father as well. How was he that open-hearted? I thought that those needed more explanation. We've all had someone in high school or middle school or just in our lives that we could not stand on principle, okay? And just imagine, you're fighting, like, your intent is to kill each other, and then when they should be dying and they could die, you're like, never mind. No, never mind. We're just gonna take him home. Like, I didn't get it. And they never say, oh, he never wanted to battle. I mean, he continues to fight in the fighting season for the next 5 years, so obviously he has no problem killing the Asuka. Yet. So there's two more things that kind of bothered me. Not as much, but I think it's worth mentioning, because I like to complain. One is while I enjoyed the book, I thought it was a good plot, I thought it happened a little too fast for believability's sake, which to me was important because while this is a fantasy novel, it's supposed to be realistic in its portrayal. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but it felt really short. And so I had to be convinced, or I had to buy, that she fell in love that fast, that she overcame her hatred of other people that fast, and that she was able to forgive her brother that fast. And then she was able to convince her own people that fast. My other issue was, I'm such a terrible person, was Elend's acceptance / forgiveness of Eerie. I say I'm a terrible person because girl knows how to hold a grudge. It was the ultimate betrayal to Elend to learn that her brother basically forgot about them. And then she has to wrap her mind around the fact that not only did he forget about them, he rejected them in favor of their enemy. It was like 2 or 3 weeks before she was like, oh, I forgive you. It went from complete and total hatred to ignoring him to being unable to accept his decisions to, I love you. I'm so glad you're okay and let's never be separated again. It was just really fast. I do feel the need to point out that I loved Fisk's family. Inge, his mother, Halvard, they were just so warm, and Halvard kind of felt stereotypical. He was like 6. I mean, he was super cute and he was super sweet, but there's that idea of they are bred to hate another kind of people. So by 6, I would think he would already have some of that ingrained in him. Maybe not. Maybe they start a little later. You know, maybe it's not from birth. He was the vehicle for her acceptance of this whole Riki thing because he accepted her. He didn't care. Like, he knew she was Asuka, and obviously she was a doer, but it didn't make any difference to him. So I guess it was seeing how he treated her that started to change her mind. And then even Inge, seeing how Inge was willing to let her escape, that Inge knew that she was Eerie's sister, which they hadn't told anybody because it would have been dangerous. This idea that people knew who she was, they knew her connection to Eerie, yet they were going to keep it a secret. They were still going to accept her. And I don't know if love her is the correct word, but they were not going to be harmful to her as her masters. If I haven't been clear, my favorite aspect of this novel was the theme of forgiveness, of acceptance. I really loved seeing Elend's evolution, even though sometimes it didn't quite make sense to me. I loved how adamant she was in her hatred for a certain kind of people. And then by the end, she was just like, why do we hate each other? Why do we treat each other like this? Like, there is a greater enemy. And I loved the picture that Eerie and Runa, his girlfriend, or, you know, whatever she's called in this society, I love the picture that they set because they represented the 2 clans and how you can come together. You can put aside your differences. Like, where you come from doesn't necessarily dictate where you're going or who you are. I mean, yes, it can dictate who you are because how you're raised is pretty much how you think and feel and believe, but it does not mean that you are better or worse than another. So I really liked that evolution and seeing how she was gonna come to terms with it, how she was going to accept her brother's relationship, how she was going to accept the fact that he let himself be adopted by the opposing clan. because you would think it would be impossible. And I loved how, because they have their different gods, and so right before that final battle scene with the Harriet, she was like, I prayed to my God, and then I did something that I've never done, and I prayed to their God. And I just loved how she started questioning, why would one God love her and one God hate her? Maybe both gods want the best for her. So that was really my favorite aspect of this novel, because you do want her and Erie to have a relationship. Fisk aside, you really want her to be able to be back with her brother. And then you really want her father to be like, you know what? He's still my son. And I'm so grateful that he's alive that I will completely ignore my upbringing. Blood is thicker than water. If I had read this book first, I would have been a total Young fan. I don't think it was outstanding enough to overcome all the problems I had with her second novel, but I'd be willing to read a third and let that be a deciding factor. Let me know what you think. Have you read either book? Did you have a favorite? Did you think that The Girl As He Gave Back was really as problematic as I did? Comments, opinions, nothing super negative, because that's my job. I'll catch you on the flip side.